Well, do you understand the right way to invest in a rising property market? For the first time in a long time, most capital cities and regional cities are primed for growth over the next year or two. There's no doubt most property markets and properties will do well over this period. But what happens once this cycle moves on? Well, it was John F. Kennedy who coined the phrase, "a rising tide lifts all boats," back in 1963 in relation to the US economy. But perhaps it's the phrase that came after that, credited to Warren Buffett, that may have helped us with the answer to that question. Only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. So while the next few years may be prosperous for many investors, it's what happens beyond this cycle that is far more important. The reason that is because most investors are looking for short term. They're probably a little bit panicky if the market's rising. They're really doing short term analysis. They're looking at median house prices rising, days on market, auctions clearance rates. In reality, that short term data can change from week to week. So they're making longer term decisions based on short term circumstances and scenarios, and that's really, really dangerous, because what happens next is going to be equally as important. They should be looking to understand longer term fundamentals, because what happens next is that the market moves on. There's always going to be a different cycle. We're going to move on to another cycle. Property prices won't keep rising. In the really, really good locations, property really drop in value. They probably drop 0 to 5%. In many superior locations, they really just soften and come off the boil a little bit. Once you start moving out, regional areas probably drop between 5 and 10%, and then outside of that is a lot more dangerous, where you see a lot more free falling of property. And I'd argue that the majority of the investors out that way are probably really speculators, hoping that things go well. But it's the property commentators and it's the spruikers that are really taking advantage of this time to give people short-term bursts of information to pump up their value or their worth. So I would suggest also that most people start with a property or the property, and then work backwards to find information to justify their decision. What they should be doing is making a decision in part of a longer term plan and understanding longer term fundamentals to make sure they make the most of this cycle. There's a tale of two cities. I think Perth is a great place to invest at the moment, particularly for the next 2 or 3 years. But the concern for me is what happens beyond that. If we go back to 2007, the Perth and Sydney house prices are on par. As we all know, Perth has dropped backwards about 50 quarters of negative growth, while Sydney's gone on to double in value. So it's a real different kind of situation because people do not understand those longer term fundamentals and study longer term data. Worse than that, in areas in mining towns to WA's north have come back even more. Property prices have dropped and mainly halved from kind of $800,000 down to $300,000 or $400,000. It's quite remarkable. So it's really important you understand how to invest during this time as part of a longer term plan, and also assess and make your information on long-term fundamentals, follow a process, and then get to the location and the property rather than doing it the other way around. It's obviously you're going to do well in the short-term property, but it's more important you get that longer-term consistent growth, and that's why you need to understand how to invest so you don't get caught swimming naked. Thanks for your time.